Okay, so obviously you guys are going to have a lot of opportunity in this conference to go deep technically into Power BI and Excel and so on. So we thought what we'd do in this session is give you a chance for us to share our longer term vision with you around the future of work, the changing world of work, and the role that we think that data and analytics is going to play in that world. So it's a little chance for you to sort of helicopter out and look at the bigger picture for an hour this morning before you dive back into details. So my name is Anton Andrews. I run the Office Envisioning team at Microsoft. And our job is to look ahead and explore the future of work. Good morning, come on in. Take a seat. So what do we think the big shifts and trends are going to be that are going to affect us, that are going to change the way we work? What do we think everyday productivity scenarios will look like 5 to 10 years from now? And we do this by conducting research outside of Microsoft with partner companies, with industry experts. And we also build prototypes. We have about 4,000 square feet of prototypes that we build with our partner engineering teams. And every now and then we make a vision video like the one that I'm going to show you today to bring some of those scenarios to life a little bit more. But before we can even start any of that, we really have to ask ourselves what words like this even mean today. And we don't believe that they mean the same thing anymore. So we know that work is not a purely utilitarian thing. Now, I don't normally have the Pope in my presentations. We spend a large part of our lives at work, though, and the Pope recently said something. He said not too long ago that without work, there is no dignity. And we spend a large part of our lives, at work, trying to be recognized, to be a part of something bigger than ourselves, trying to make a difference. And, as he points out, this is something that's deeply important to most people on this planet. And yet, the world that we work within is changing, and we believe it's changing in some pretty significant ways. And the first of these big shifts, good morning, come on in. The first of these big shifts in the world of work is the exponential increase in the speed and volume of information in the world around us. I'm just going to show you a quick graphic here. So back in 2006, there were 0.16 zettabytes of data, global data volume in the world. About 2 years ago, it was somewhere in the 4s. And by 2020, it's projected to be 44 zettabytes. That's 44 billion terabytes. It's kind of an insane, mind-boggling number. And so when we look at that, imagine 28 zettabytes of that is going to be company managed. So imagine you're an employee working in one of these companies. Good luck knowing that that crucial piece of data you need exists, let alone finding it, or finding that correlation between two interesting things that might have helped you. And beyond that, the volume of communications is also exploding. So the distraction, we have a mix of men and women in this room, the distraction caused by the average 7 to 11 email interruptions that a male information worker gets per hour causes a temporary drop in working IQ of 10 points. That's 3 times worse than being stoned. That's for the men in this room. For the women in this room, you come off with about half that effect. So the future belongs to you. So I managed to get the Pope and a hash leaf in my presentation. So, on top of that, the half-life of learning is dropping really fast too. We know, for example, that in the technical field that I'm sure a lot of you guys are in, you can be left with as little as 15% relevant technical knowledge in as few as 5 years. If you're a medic, you're a doctor nowadays, you would need, theoretically, to read 60 hours a week just to keep up to date with the information advances in your particular field. So clearly, the volume of data and conversations and the speed of information has surpassed the threshold of our human capability to deal with it. And on the other hand, that's on the one hand. On the other hand, there's this giant opportunity that is being created with this world that's now, full of sensors, with all these IoT devices, information being generated more rapidly than ever before, there's a giant opportunity to extract more and more meaning from all of this data. So we now live in the world of information abundance that results in this interesting creative tension. You could call it a just-in-time knowledge environment. And we believe very strongly that we're going to need new real-time tools to stay on top of this flood of information, to derive meaning from it, make sense of it, without getting distracted and losing focus. We're going to want to weave data and insights and analytics into our work as we go, rather than stopping, going and finding stuff out and coming back to our work. And instead of bringing week-old PowerPoints to meetings, we're going to want to discuss fresh information right there on the spot. But speed and volume aren't the only challenge. The world is becoming increasingly interconnected as well. And socially networked communications are rapidly changing the structure of the organizations that a lot of us work in. And I'll get to why we have the military in here in a second. So information flows much faster and more freely through social networks and networked communication tools than it does through hierarchies and linear communication tools, like old-fashioned email. And because networks are open and transparent by their very nature, they actually help unlock what we call the tacit knowledge of employees, the things that the people in an organization know but don't necessarily write down or log in any form. And this puts massive stress on hierarchies. After all, hierarchies are built to control information, but it also shifts knowledge transfer from linear distribution to dynamic participation. And this in turn accelerates problem solving and learning. And so this is really important because when the world is increasingly interconnected on the one hand, and when things are changing more rapidly than ever before, you end up with very volatile conditions. You end up with a very volatile world. And in this volatile environment, you have to be responsive and adaptive in order to survive. You need to be able to make better and faster and smarter decisions on the fly, and knowledge exchange is a critical part of that. And so that all sounds good in theory, but we wanted to learn about this in practice. So last year I was lucky enough to spend 3 hours talking with retired 4-star General Stanley McChrystal about his time running Joint Special Operations Command in Iraq. And one of the realizations that he came to was that they were a hierarchy fighting a network, and that to win against a network, they had to think like a network and behave like a network. And so he did something unheard of. So JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command, I don't know if you're familiar, it's actually a bunch of different teams and even different nations working together. And so he flipped their communication protocol for that entire organization from need to know, which is standard in the military, right, need to know, he flipped it on his head to need not to know. And essentially what he did was he said, well, okay, there are a couple of people here and a couple of teams and organizations that definitely should not know this stuff, and they cut them out. And pretty much allowed information to flow very freely between everyone else. And not only did they allow information to flow freely, they actually forced it and encouraged it. So there were daily massive roundtable Skype meetings, international, of course. But also he encouraged the sharing of fresh, live, up-to-the-minute data between every single team, every single day. And so essentially, their teams were now working in public. Every team could see what every other team was doing in real time as they were working, and they could reach out and help each other, which they couldn't before. And obviously now, people became involved in your project that you would never have thought to reach out to in the first place because they weren't a member of the traditional hierarchical team that you had set up. So what this sharing did was it built trust and it aligned purpose, but more importantly, it created what he calls a shared consciousness. And because everyone now had the bigger picture, people at the edges were empowered to make decisions as conditions on the ground changed very rapidly. And this allowed their entire organization to become much more effective and responsive. Thank you. So we thought that was super interesting. And then on top of that, in this networked world, the opportunity for value creation is shifting from the individual to the collective. Teams are becoming much more important. This doesn't mean that individuals are not going to do phenomenal work, and there will still be individual geniuses and so on. But the larger opportunity is shifting towards the team, because there's just simply too much information coming in now for any one individual to wrap their head around. And those teams are becoming more diverse and more distributed, and not just geographically. For example, we know that in the US, about 50% of the workforce is going to be made up of contingent and independent workers by 2020. 50%, it's a crazy number. In the UK, it's the fastest growing sector of the economy, and the fastest growing sector within that is highly skilled tech workers with MSCs and PhDs. So we're not talking about burger flippers here. And these independent players are obviously going to be playing a really major role in tomorrow's workforce, right? So instead of the traditional static hierarchical team setup that we're used to, what we see increasingly is that people are bringing the right people from the right disciplines and even from other organizations together to form the right team. It's much more like the Hollywood model or like Ocean's 11. You know, you want to rob a bank, you put the perfect team together. And so we're seeing more and more of that happening. And we're also seeing organizations, and actually there's a huge report on this just last week, organizations are increasingly breaking down their hierarchies and forming networks of teams within the organizations that are able to more rapidly respond to changing conditions. So again, what has this got to do with us? So as these teams form and disband and reform, it becomes much more fluid, and we're going to need much better ways for us all to quickly ramp up, establish mindshare, and start collaborating. And when both the environment is fluid and teams are fluid, then speed of reaction becomes really, really important. And so the idea that we're going to be sharing real-time access to data and insights with each other becomes critical. So this leads us to our third area, which might seem a little out of place in this particular conference, but again, it makes sense, I promise. The workplace is broken. So there's this crazy statistic that has been true for about 4 or 5 years now. On any given day in any given organization, half of the buildings will be empty. On any given day, if you stack up everyone in Microsoft and cram them all into buildings at full capacity, half the buildings would be empty. And so does that mean that offices are not important? You know, the mobile revolution is in full swing today. You can work from anywhere. Maybe the office isn't important. We don't believe that that's true. And there's actually an interesting sort of clue if we look at the explosive growth of co-working spaces. In a large global survey, a census that was done recently, about 96% of respondents cited that the most important thing they looked for in a co-working space, and the reason they went there, was what they called the community of innovation. And when you break that down, what that means is that people are looking for access, people are looking for spaces that give them access to new knowledge, that expose them to different expertise, and that accelerate their learning. And so this type of knowledge sharing, it turns out, still happens best face-to-face through social interactions as people collide and connect on the work floor. Because more often than not, it's unintentional knowledge exchange. And this actually has a name. It's called social physics. And you can actually encourage it, and there are people who study it, like Sandy Pentland at MIT has just written a book called Social Physics. But on top of that, there are people who actually make it their business to measure this and make changes in the layout of your space in your organization, because this can impact hard business metrics and the bottom line. So there's a company run by Ben Weber called Humanize, for example, that does this. But for us, they changed the placement of coffee machines and staircases and the timing of lunch breaks and so on. For us, that stuff doesn't matter. The reason we're interested in this is it shifts how we think about workspace. Workspace is not about designing offices and cubicles. It's not about square feet. It's not about cost. Workspace for us is a communication tool. And we think about workspace as a communication tool and a data access tool. And we think it should be designed as a communication tool and a data access tool. And so this opens up the opportunity for us to start creating what you might call a technologically active landscape, where we've activated the vertical surfaces in the workspace to actually give you access to information and to help you have discussions and dialogues as the need arises. And so we think about a spectrum of space that you move around, that you move through during your day as an individual or as a team. And whether it's that triage, the team meeting, some heads down productivity that you need to do for a couple of hours, or maybe an impromptu discussion that you have with someone you just bumped into in the corridor, all of those things should be possible by picking and choosing part of that landscape and then simply turning to the wall, for example, in this picture, and accessing the information and the data you need and the analytics that you need. And so essentially the landscape that you're working in becomes a participant in the dialogue that you're having with the information around you. And so the shifts we discussed today create a radically different work environment. About 100 years ago, Frederick Winslow Taylor showed up at the workplace with his stopwatch, and I think he wrote The Principles of Scientific Management. And we still run companies the same way today, to do the same thing repetitively at scale with maximum efficiency. And it's kind of mind-boggling because back 100 years ago, it made sense. We lived in a very predictable environment. Information was scarce. You knew what you were doing, and you had to do it with maximum efficiency. It made sense. Today, we live in a very unpredictable environment. And the more C-suites and the more boards we talk to, the more we're convicted that these strategies no longer make sense. In the information abundant world, finding the answers together is a much better strategy and a better mindset than struggling alone. Networking and trust yield better results than protectionism. In a volatile environment, experimenting and learning and rapidly iterating and responding are critical to survival. And pushing decision-making to the edges is not only faster than command and control, but it actually results in much more empowered and engaged employees, which again leads to a more resilient organization or a more resilient team. And this can feel really odd because companies that are optimized for this today, and there are companies that do this already today, they actually they sacrifice efficiency of process, which we have come to believe is the Holy Grail. They sacrifice that in order to achieve effectiveness of outcomes. So that's deeply, deeply counterintuitive. It goes against everything that all of our management books have told us for the last 50 years. So let me give you a very tangible example. Zara. Who knows Zara? Fashion retailer, right? A bunch of you have shopped there. So Zara recently had a chance to talk with their head of digital. They're really interesting. They actually run their production lines at suboptimal efficiency on purpose. Horrible trade-off. And every day they have fresh information coming in about what's selling at each store around the world. They also have teams going around asking you why you're putting that thing back on the rack, what didn't you like about it. Results in super messy information, really hard to catalog nicely and cleanly. That information floods back in as well. Then they've empowered their teams at the edges to absorb this information and make instant decisions on the ground, on the fly. Rather than having to go up and down the management chain to ask for approval, they're allowed to instantly make changes to that item in the line. Because the factories run at suboptimal efficiency, they have tons of slack. Because they have tons of slack, they go straight into production. And this results in a turnaround time for Zara of 3 weeks. Does anyone know what the fashion average is, the fashion industry average? It's 6 to 9 months. So they went from 6 to 9 months to 3 weeks by making these crazy trade-offs, sacrificing efficiency in order to achieve effectiveness of outcome. Makes sense, right? So we believe that this focus on effectiveness and responsiveness requires a fresh definition of productivity. And in the end, when you look at all these things, it comes down to the people. We believe that the future of work is going to be centered around people, not processes, not documents, not desks, people. And because we get stuff done together more than we do alone, it's going to have to focus on helping our activities, helping us achieve our goals together. And we believe it's going to be defined by 3 key themes. We're going to need to collaborate across more boundaries with more people to solve bigger problems. So we're going to need much better tools for us to come together and work together across those boundaries. At the same time, we're going to need contextual intelligence. We live in this world of information abundance now, And we believe that it's going to be critical for us to focus on the things that we actually care about at work. It's going to be critical for us to use contextual intelligence so that the right information comes to us at the right time, and we're assisted by an analytics as we work so that we don't get distracted and lose focus in that flood of information. But those really are just two cornerstones. The ultimate goal is what you might call creative flow. As automation gets rid of more and more of the rote tasks and rote work and replaces more and more of those kind of routine jobs, we believe that the employable jobs in the future are really going to be focused on creative work, on human judgment, on human decision making. And that is going to require the ability for us to work the way that our minds work, naturally and spontaneously. And it's going to require tools and environments that let us work naturally and spontaneously, rather than breaking things down into formats and documents and silos and databases. We're going to have to be able to work across all of those things in a very, very fluid manner. And we call that creative flow. So obviously across Microsoft, we're busy prototyping a large number of experiences, hardware and software, work tools and environments that reflect these principles. And we recently made a video that brings some of these things to life in a slightly more aspirational way. And I'm going to show you that now, but before I do, I'd like to quickly introduce our two main characters, Kat and Lola. So Kat is an independent. She's a marine biologist. She's involved with research and with schools, but she's also always on the lookout for that next job to further her passions and put some money in the bank. Lola, on the other hand, is a corporate exec. She's setting up a new bio facility in East Asia, and she's looking for that one final person to complete her team. Okay, do we have audio? Is this audio here?
Mm-hmm. Should be playing.
Maybe.
Oh, do you have volume up on your?
I do.
Mm-hmm.
It's odd.
This is power.
That's just, oh, that was just power.
Here's audio too.
So maybe if we take that out and plug it in there.
Mm-hmm.
Can we turn that up a little bit? Thank you. Okay, so that's, that's interesting. That was a lot in 6 minutes. So I'm going to take you through all of that. I don't expect that all to have made any sense to you whatsoever. And instead of going through scene by scene, what I'll do is I'll go through thematic by the thematic clusters we mentioned earlier. So, and before we dive in, I just want to point out that every single piece of software and every single piece of hardware you saw in that video is not science fiction. It all exists in a lab somewhere, mostly in our labs. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask me later. But let's start with bringing people together. So one of the things you saw in the video is this notion of high empathy presence. The fact that you can be with someone, or it's as if you were with them, even when you're not actually there. And so we saw Kat diving, and suddenly somebody inked in her field of view, and this conversation started, and we pulled out, and we realized that she was talking with a mute girl who was using sign language, and that was actually being translated in real time. And then we pulled out further, and we realized there was an entire classroom of kids following her on her dive as she went through her various activities. And they were all following her dive in different ways, but they could see the world through her eyes as if they were there with her. And obviously, this was a classroom example, and it wasn't heavy on data, but you can imagine, remote experts working together, people sharing data through that scenario. And in fact, that's what we do a little bit later in the video when you see, Dad's just had a knee implant, and he's having a chat with his daughter after surgery, and he's allowing live data to stream from his knee implant to her screen in her room. And that was a parallax display that we're using there, so it looks like he's actually in the next room. And then similarly, Lola shows up on her new team's Blackboard, and she's able to work with them and analyze data with them using, in this case, their Power BI tools on their screen, as if she was there working with them shoulder to shoulder, even though she's actually remote. And this is something we're working on, this idea of very high empathy remote collaboration. And in this case, we're able to do this using some pretty fancy avatar technology from Hollywood. So interesting experiments there. But collaboration obviously is bigger than just high empathy presence. How can we create truly collaborative environments and workspaces? And so one of the things we're looking at is really kind of giving our workspace, our work canvas, an overhaul. And here, what you saw in the video was this notion that you can work above apps and across formats and easily compile and gather and share and discuss information. And you saw Kat putting her dive data in and the various characters in her team then discussing their ideas and evolving their ideas. The Blackboard itself is not just some kind of team whiteboard or something. It actually turns a dumb concrete space into a smart multi-user space. It has facial recognition, it has proximity, it has gesture, touch, 100-point multi-touch, so multi-user. So this is where we start to think about, when we think about things like data visualization and interacting with data, we also have to stop thinking about just purely individuals and one mouse, one keyboard input. And we have to start thinking about multiple people working together at the same time without having to take turns to interact with that data. So super interesting stuff. If we go look at intelligence, we said that attention is the new scarce resource. We live in this world of information abundance. And so what if instead of running after information, the right information and the right tools could come to us at the right time? You could say at the moment of need. And this is where we open the movie with Kat diving, and she sees world-locked holograms placed in the world around her. And this is something we can do today, obviously, with HoloLens. And so this is a new way of thinking about data visualization and information visualization. It's actually placed in the world around you in the right place. So rather than calling it up on a screen, it shows up in front of the thing that it's about. And obviously it's personalized to her, so not everybody would see this, but only the right people. Afterwards, she walks into the cafe. She gets a cafe menu, so she can order tea in this case. And then we see her interacting with some contextual feeds. And the details of this are not important today, but essentially what's happening is that we have contextual engines drawing across apps, aggregating information, aggregating conversations, and bringing that to you to keep you focused and on track. And at the same time, they're not just aggregating information, but they're actually making information actionable. And so making information actionable is a key thing that we're focused on. And this helps keep her informed and up to date, but also keeps her moving forwards faster. And we also think a lot, obviously, we have Cortana, we have Xiao Ice in Asia, and we think a lot about intelligent personal assistance and how this can help you make the most of every moment and focus on the things that matter, on the things that you're trying to get done. And what we saw here was, Kat was in the night market, important message came in, a work offer, with a meeting for tomorrow morning, potentially. And this is where Cortana kicks in and uses predictive intelligence, essentially, to learn and anticipate Kat's needs over time. And because it has that capability, in this case, it can notice that, well, she has a brunch booked with her friends tomorrow morning. She might want to move that brunch. Here's a time that's available that everyone can make and a location. Does she want to accept this work offer? Here's a quick reply she's put together. Is that reply good enough? She might need a calm space to prepare for the meeting tonight, and she might need a route to get to that space. So instead of her having to spend 15, 20 minutes figuring all of that stuff out in emails and multiple phone calls and so on, all she does is say yes 3 times with 3 finger clicks on her armband, and she's away. And so what might have otherwise been very laborious becomes incredibly simple and easy, and she can focus on the task at hand, the thing that's actually important, which is getting ready for this meeting tomorrow. We also, when we think about working with information and working with data, we think a lot about focus. And what we saw later in the co-working space was that Kat puts these earbuds in. It could also be a Microsoft band or a third-party band. And this measures heart rate, respiration, blood flow, blood oxygen. And we can sense from those things when she's going into a state of flow. And when she does, Cortana puts her workspace into do not disturb mode, and she essentially goes into lockdown, and it suppresses incoming communication. We know from our research that if you get kicked out by one email, if you look at one email that has nothing to do with the thing that you're working on, it takes you 15 to 20 minutes to regain the state of flow that you had before you check that email. If you check 3 emails and you only had 1 hour to prepare, there's your 1 hour gone. So flow is kind of important. Also later we saw Lola transfer one of her phone calls to a wall. And what you see happening there is on the left, Cortana's transcribing everything that they're saying to each other, that she's saying to this person called Gordon Bennett. But on the right, more interestingly, Cortana's bringing documents and data and fresh information in that relates to the things that they're talking about. So if we mention a document in the phone call, that document just shows up. We don't have to go digging and hunting for it. If you mention some sales numbers to me from Asia Pacific, those sales numbers just show up. And later, when the drones are surveying the crops underwater, and this is actually something that can already be done above water, they use Azure Cloud Analytics to predict harvest and to predict yield. And those things are just delivered to the team. Again, eliminating rote tasks so the team can focus on what's essential. So that takes us to this idea of creative flow. And like I said earlier, the idea with creative flow is really to focus on human decision-making and on human judgment, and providing tools and environments that allow us to work spontaneously and naturally the way our minds work, but at the same time augmenting our natural human capabilities with the tremendous analytical power of machines, and doing that in a very natural way and in a way that's fluid across devices and locations. So if we, the first part of that, obviously in the video you saw people interchangeably using pen, ink, voice, touch, gesture throughout the video and holograms. So we think this type of natural interaction is going to play a much bigger role as we look at these types of interaction. Also, we saw these very responsive environments. Increasingly our world is full of sensors and devices and displays. How can we best make use of them to support modern work? And I guess the one thing that I'll point out there is as they walked into their lab, we triangulated facial recognition with their personal device, the mobile phone in their pocket, with their organizational context, so the fact that they work there, they work in that lab, they're members of that team, etc. When you triangulate those things, you can actually, with very high confidence, know that you're in front of the whiteboard with your team. And that allows you then to pull up and rehydrate your work. And so we can hydrate these surfaces with your work so you can just continue where you left off. And you have all the data access privileges and so on that you would normally have. And so we're now looking at not just hydrating surfaces, but actually hydrating entire rooms with information for you as needed. But, you know, mobility of experience and natural interaction are not enough to create creative flow. And so one of the big questions is, well, you know, how are we going to generate and evolve ideas together and actually do the act of creation, if you like? How are we going to generate and evolve ideas? And what we saw here was Lola working on this glass wall, which is a transparent touch OLED. We have one of these in our lab. They're a lot of fun. And when she's working here, she appears to be calling up data. But the thing that I want to point out is that she's not calling up pre-made visualizations. We call it invoking. She's invoking raw data, and that data is being visualized for her in real time. And as she sees things and changes her mind and decides to invoke something else or to change one of the axes on a graph by scratching it out and writing a new name on the axis, or she's conversationally talking to Cortana in this case, the information that's visualized and displayed keeps changing. And so it's evolving with her as she thinks, and it's actually helping her evolve her thinking. And at the same time, you know, if it was just information visualization, that would not be enough, because that puts all of the onus on you as an end user to ask the right question. And so what we're increasingly interested in, and we believe this next year is going to be all about intelligence and analytics, what we're increasingly interested in is this idea that not only can we visualize information for you, the information that you asked for, that you think is what you needed to see, but we can also start bringing understanding to you. So we can start bringing insights to you and bringing data to you that you might not have asked for. So for example, we can use the enterprise graph to find correlated data sets that perhaps relate to the information that she's exploring, but that she had a blind spot for. Or we could use organizational analytics to help identify the fact that you had run through a very similar mental pattern just a couple of days or a couple of weeks ago and had explored similar items, but had gone down a different avenue. And that might be super interesting to her. And so by running these different kinds of analytics in the background, we can actually create the capability for her to have a better understanding of what she's dealing with, and not just visualize the things that she asked for. And we can do this in a very natural, conversational way, instead of sort of peppering her with dashboards, which is where we are today. And so we think that's incredibly interesting. Another example of that is live business modeling. Here, in this case with HoloLens, you saw Kat sort of live business modeling with HoloLens where she's changing parameters. In this case, it's a kelp farm, but it could be anything. And as she changes those parameters, the information is updated in real time to sort of simulate and model potential effects that those changes might have. And the interesting thing about this, of course, is that with HoloLens, you're able to visualize information in an entirely new way, in a way that's actually placed in your world. And you can get up and you can walk around it. Multiple people can look at it at the same time. You can share it across distances very easily, etc. So again, very, very exciting development. And there's more, but I'll leave it at that. So the message that I'd like you to take away from this today is a fresh definition of productivity. We're moving away from this very industrial model that we've had for so long, which was about mechanization and efficiency and repetition. And instead, we're moving towards a definition that is much more about people. It's about people bringing forth new value through human ingenuity and creativity in ways that are more effective and responsive rather than simply efficient. And it's about building inspired teams and communities that can solve bigger challenges. It's about individuals being able to focus their time and attention on the things that matter to them with the power of contextual intelligence. And it's about the ability for all of us to work naturally and from anywhere with a new type of clay real-time information. And that, we believe, makes work more human, and ultimately, this is our vision for the future of productivity. Thank you very much. So I hope that made sense. Do you have any questions or thoughts or comments?
Silly question, can we get the video?
The video is actually online. If you search for Microsoft Future Productivity Vision video, it's online. Also, if you're interested in some of the background research and the people we interviewed to talk about some of this stuff over the last year or two, if you go to microsoft.com/productivity vision, you will get a series of 8 videos. They're about 7 minutes each, and each of them focuses on a different aspect of the changing world of work. Yep.
So are you socializing this under the heading of ambient intelligence, or I think that was the term that was used, or data culture, or
Those,
that was the term I heard come out of, I think maybe in the same article I read where our mission is the power of
yeah, I think a while back Satya, and this is Satya's mission statement, right, for our company. And I think a while back he talked about ambient intelligence, but those are all just different technical ways of talking about similar things. And so, what we're trying to do is to step back and look at the human perspective and the human angle on this. And as we think about the user experience of using data, of using information, of using analytics, what is that going to be like? And ambient intelligence is actually a term that's been around for a long time now. Pervasive computing, ubiquitous computing, ambient intelligence, and so on. Those are all technical terms to look at the ecosystem of machines and devices. And if you can put that to one side and then look at the effect that that has on the larger operating system of the organization. So rather than the technical operating system, there's the organizational operating system, the operating system of the team and of the people. And that actually is where a lot of the changes are happening right now. We see this massive increase in volatility, geopolitical, stocks, business environment, you name it. And we talk to we have a lot of one-on-one sit-downs with boards and C-suites with our partner companies.
Is Microsoft taking a view of the world that's sort of outside of technology, like the human view, but as a business, you see Microsoft sort of putting that in its, teaching these cultural things, change things, or softer things that historically haven't been, in terms of inculcating some of these technologies and stuff. There's a lot of human stuff going on there.
So is Microsoft putting culture at the center rather than just technology? Is that your question?
You don't think that Microsoft is doing anything other than technology?
Right. Yes, Microsoft is still a technology company. But I think we are very, very firmly, when we think about our vision for the future of productivity, it's a company-wide vision. It's not just an Office vision or a Skype vision or a Power BI vision. It's company-wide. And we have very, very firmly put people at the center of that vision. And this is from Satya on down. And it's relatively new. In terms of the evolution of the company and the lifespan of the company, it's a relatively new thing. But I think it's a very good thing, and it's something that we're all very excited about and that everyone can get behind because, work is something we all do, and work is something that affects us as human beings, and it's something we want to make better. And obviously, our job is to provide the right technology and the right tools and environments to allow those changes to happen. Our job is not to go and retrain your organization. Other people can do that better than we can. But we need to look at that bigger picture in order to provide the right tools, the right technologies. Any other questions? Yes.
So I guess thinking through how does the innovation, if it's truly about people, how does the innovation not outpace people, right? In terms of one access perspective, to all innovation globally, then how does Microsoft ensure that as a disability, all groups of people have access to the technology?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. It's a very good question. So inclusion and access, especially when you look at the global perspective. If information is so important, how do we ensure inclusive access to that information across the world? And obviously there are parts of the world that are not, that don't live with fiber broadband and so on. So yeah, it's a very good question. It's something that we're keenly aware of, and we're pursuing multiple different strategies to look at providing access to this information in different ways. Obviously, when you look at a vision video like this, it's very much a first world type of experience, right, where you have these amazing touch displays that are transparent and whatever. Those allow us to experiment with new forms of interaction, which is why we're pursuing some of those things. Obviously, when you look at global access and inclusion, those may not be the best ways to do it in every part of the world. And so I think we're pushing innovation on multiple horizons and multiple fronts. Some of that is, how do you access stuff with a very low-end feature phone, still get access to very, very similar information. Right at the other end of the spectrum, we have these very advanced, technologically advanced environments that we need to keep experimenting with and pushing with so that we keep innovating and stay at the front of innovation. So I think the answer to that would take too long to answer it right now in this room, but there are multiple sort of fronts of innovation, some of which include exactly what you're talking about. And it's something that's talked about at the SLT level, the senior leadership team level. So it's not something that's sort of pushed to the side. It's very much a primary concern. Okay, if there are no other questions, thank you very much. I hope that was interesting.